Hello, friends. This is the Alphalist podcast. I am your host, Toby. The goal of the Alphalist podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for their company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply. Welcome to the Alphalist podcast. My name is Toby and I'm your host today. And today with me is Alexander Matthey, tuned in from Berlin. Alex is actually the CTO of Adyen. A few weeks ago, I didn't know that Adyen actually has a German CTO and an office in Berlin, etc., etc. I mean, most people here, I guess, know Adyen. It is publicly listed. It is a PSP FinTech, and it has a market cap of 35 billion euros. That's crazy. So I guess one of the most successful European tech companies. Is that correct, Alex? Did I introduce you correctly?
I would say so. Yeah, it's true. I think we're looking at a very successful last 16 years or so since the company started, and we are very happy with where we are right now.
And the company is from the Netherlands.
It is. Yeah, it was founded in Amsterdam, I think 2006, if I remember correctly. But by now we look at ourselves very much as a global company.
And is it still founder-led?
Yes. It was founded by 2 people in the board and 4 engineers. And of these, there is only one of the founders still there, but he is still our CEO, Peter van der Dust. And he's still very much involved in everyday activities.
But he's not an engineer, right?
No, he's not. He's actually a commercial person. So it was founded by the former CTO, Arnoud, and him. So it was really a combination of a commercial person and a technical person. And for a long time, that was our secret sauce, to keep out all the other distraction and just have very good engineers and very good commercial people figure it out.
Until you took over then. No, just joking.
Started earlier already, but at some point it's difficult to scale. But I think the mindset is still there.
Okay, and you started off as an engineer. Let's maybe look at your history a bit. Like, what is your personal nerd journey? Like, why are you doing what you're doing? When did you start?
Well, I started in school with coding. Actually, my first tech job, if you want to say so, was coding Microsoft Access databases for the Allianz Versicherung. And even though I didn't really wanted to fully focus on it, I kind of always have stayed close to technology. So then I, when I finished school and started studying, I started a little own company with a friend of mine where we were doing dynamic websites, which was the thing at that point. And
so PHP or what?
On PHP, indeed. And we had a strong focus on accessibility, which is something that at that point was not really something. But there were certain companies and foundations that really wanted to ensure that also their websites are highly accessible for people that are blind or need additional assistance. And we were focusing on that. That was kind of our sweet spot. And we've worked on it for quite a while. But over time, I started to work then in more startup scenarios as a contractor. Typically still on the PHP side. This is also how I, at some point, got into the Rocket Internet sphere a little bit, where then I spent my last gig before Adyen at a Rocket Internet company called Glossybox.
You were a CTO at Glossybox, right?
Yeah, I started also as a contractor there, and then I was hired into the CTO role, indeed. Stayed there for a while, yeah.
Okay, cool. So you were, I guess, back then like really hands-on, and I assume that changed in your 9 years of Adyen, which is a crazy tenure from my perspective, like a great tenure. Really
Yeah.
speaks for the company.
Yeah. I think in both cases, actually, at Glossybox, but also at Adyen, I didn't start as a CTO. I started as somebody that was very hands-on. I was able to really help the business on the technical side, but also maybe help people within the organization because I did it for quite some time. And by that, I was growing my influence, my impact, and kind of became the CTO with that background. And yeah, it's actually, if you want to say so, it's a very comparable story in both companies where I think I was just the right person for the job at some point.
Okay. How hard was it for you to let's say let go coding and decide against it and fully jump on management?
Not so hard, to be honest.
Yeah.
The reason for it is that I was actually all my career surrounded by engineers that are better than I am. They typically got a lot of energy out of it, and I typically needed to spend more energy. I got my energy out of ensuring that we are building the right thing and really understanding the problem that needs to be solved, and kind of taking a little bit away of the heavy lift of that. So within the engineering teams that I was part of, even as an engineer, I always kind of tended to also take on kind of responsibilities around this one to represent ourselves against the business or against product or whatsoever. And on the other hand, I was still able to develop stuff myself and take the right decisions there. So therefore, I was relatively well respected by my engineering colleagues, I would say. And over time, probably 8 years ago or so, I stopped coding completely. I don't think it's a big miss for the world, to be honest. There's so many people that are so much better in it than I am.
That's a good realization, right? If you really at a certain point can admit that and don't get so much energy out of coding, then like really jump over. Do you like these days still code like privately every once in a while, or use your, let's say, hidden superpowers to generate something with ChatGPT that only you understand and then run it on your computer or something like that?
A little. I think I realize now I have two kids, two boys, and the older one is 14 now, and he's quite interested in technology as well. So I think it's closest there where I'm actually kind of working with him a little bit, kind of explain him the fundamentals, and there I'm also looking at the tools that nowadays being used for teaching coding, for example, and try them out. So that's probably the closest that I am with coding right now. However, I am quite impressed with the whole GenAI tooling that is coming up, because as long as the code base is not too big, I think there is quite some gains that you can get out of it, and over time that will change quite dramatically.
Yeah. Developing will be quite different in 10 years from now, right? But it always was, right? So
yeah, indeed. And I mean, it's always changing. However, I think it's the first time that we kind of introduce such an abstraction layer across kind of how technology really works. That I'm also a little bit afraid if we will continue to have enough people to really understand and be able to challenge the outcome. Which right now you have a lot of these people because they have been coding for 15, 20 years or so. So whatever drops out of a ChatGPT or a Copilot or so, they are able to challenge that and maybe adjust it to their needs. If you grew up and learned coding like that, I wonder if you actually kind of how hard it will be for people to still be critical.
Yeah. Good question. But I mean, if you look at the tools available, I mean, you just mentioned that you're coding with your son, right? It like the complexity kind of changed a lot. Like it got so much simpler to get into it, right? And to you have the right tools at hand. You can even build like I did a similar thing like two weeks ago. I bought one of those Calliope mini devices. Do you know them? Like a bit like Raspberry Pi, but for kids. And you can really it's so easy to code something. It's so easy to build a robot and then really explain it and understand the content, etc. Like that. That's like the new abstraction layer, and then adding AI on top that will really lead to I don't know what it will lead to, but I think you can also teach critical thinking still, right? Because there's so many good tools.
Yeah, but I think you do see. I mean, in general, I agree. However, what you see is I think it's really easy to get started if you want to build a really complex, highly scalable, highly available system. Then a lot of the abstraction layers that are on top that make it really easy, and these no code tools and stuff like that, they don't work. They just don't scale.
Yeah,
you give up so much control that it's very difficult to really run it in production on a big scale. And I think there is a little bit the gap that I'm seeing. I think we will find solutions for that. Don't get me wrong, but I think that will be an interesting case, or an interesting question to be answered in the future.
I think this leads to human still being needed somehow, right?
Hopefully,
which is also not bad. I would say would be boring without work. So let's see. Comparing your two gigs with Glossybox and now Adyen, they are quite different, right? I mean, why did you get from sending beauty boxes to a PSP?
But I think in those ones, I'm more or less slided in a little bit. It was not that either of them I felt like I really want to be part of a beauty box subscription model, and that's the closest thing for me. As I said, I started there as a contractor, but I had to say that I learned quite a lot in the Rocket Internet world. So I actually I was not in line with all the cultural choices that have been made, but there was a lot of things that I learned during that time, and therefore, when there was this opportunity to take over more responsibility and ownership, I actually was a big fan of that. And then when I decided to leave Glossybox, that was mostly because it was, let's say, from a technical point of view, not that challenging anymore. We had proven the business model. It was working relatively fine. We have rolled out in all the regions, so we wanted to. It was a profitable company at that point, and we just wanted to, continue to operate it. And then, from an engineering point of view, it was not per se interesting. So I was looking for my next gig, and at that point, Adyen stood out for me because I knew them for a while. They were our payment provider, one of our payment providers at that time. I knew the team. I knew how they over these 4 years that I was working with them from a customer point of view, they actually have been able to increase the quality of the team, which typically is not happening from my perspective, and also the quality of the product without really losing speed. They were still growing fast, but also innovating fast. So that's why they became interesting for me. More interesting to join a team with a good mission than joining somewhere where I would be a CTO again, because I didn't start as a CTO at Adyen. And but on the other hand, it was also not like FinTech or payments per se was not really it's also not my passion at that time. It was really the team and the way how they ran the business. Over time, by now, I would consider myself a payment nerd. But that's just by doing it over time and being passionate about what you deal with. So when I'm going in a shop, well, I always check out what the setup is and if it's smooth. And if I'm checking out online, I always feel like there is something that can be improved. And I typically do a screenshot and send it over to somebody from the commercial group and say we should go after them.
Yeah, I do exactly the same. Like I once sent the CTO of SumUp a picture of a pissed seller at the market, at the weekly market, who was waiting for the transaction to finish.
Yeah.
So yeah,
on the SumUp
once you get into that, right?
On the SumUp terminal.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I actually was I was at lunch with him once. and then we paid at the end, and it was not sum up. So he immediately went into sales mode and tried to convince them to switch. So I think that's just where you get into.
Yeah, I also told a few restaurants to move over already.
Indeed.
Yeah. So you basically turned from a customer into the CTO, which is an interesting change in perspectives. But also from Rocket Internet to Adyen, like how do the cultures differ?
I think the main part is a long-term perspective. I think at that time, and I think that has changed, but when I was at Rocket, the main goal was to grow very quickly and take a global, yeah, and create a global footprint, not per se to build a long-term sustainable company, but actually in order to be kind of the first choice to be bought or exited or something like that. And at Adyen, the founders did it already. Kind of, they did had a payments company beforehand, which they sold to the RBS, the Royal Bank of Scotland, which then turned into WorldPay, which is now still one of our competitors. But kind of, if you would have asked them, they would have the feeling that this kind of destroyed their product because innovation was gone. They had so many more ideas that were very difficult to still continue to be developed in this new setup. So they always, I think, had the feeling we sold too early. Kind of, there would have been more stuff that we should have been doing, and we should have taken more time. And that's really the idea behind Adyen. We built something for the long run. And that was already the case when they started. That is, we don't want to necessarily need to make it super big in the short term, but we want to build something that brings us in a situation where we on the long term can innovate. And that was a guiding principle over time and still is. And I think that drives a lot of our technical, but also compliance, regulatory decisions, which is probably the biggest difference, that you actually take the time to build something really good. And then sometimes you feel that's maybe a slower path than others. But if you kind of always take let's say the right one that keeps you in control and keeps it, fast for the long term, then you at some point get into the stages where you can innovate very, very quickly. And we are by now in that phase, and that's quite nice.
I can relate to that. But the path there is kind of rocky, right? Like, especially as a bank, isn't it? Like you told me when we spoke first that you also build a bank, etc. Like, it sounds super complex, regulatory wise. Like, isn't that like? Aren't you at a certain point? Didn't you like say, "Hey, that's it for me"? I mean, you're there for 9 years, and you kind of made like the very like initial steps as well, or some of the initial steps as well, and your life was, I think, not always easy. Like, how did you survive for such a long time then?
Well, I'm really behind that idea. I think it's actually fun to build a company with that in mind. And maybe also if we turn it more into the technical side, I think a very strong principle for us at Adyen is that we believe being in control helps us to deliver a better product. So we don't really want to be dependent on too many other companies, because ultimately what you're seeing very often in the payments world very specifically is that many different systems are plugged together. And they kind of work and everybody is adding some value, but it's very difficult to move from there towards something new, because then you need to make sure that all the different players, the gateway, the PSP, the risk system, the acquirer, the issuer, all of them, maybe the settlement banks, that they all kind of innovate at the same speed, that it's put in the right roadmaps and stuff like that. And that's also a very, very difficult fight to be fought. And we take a very different approach. We say where we really don't want to be dependent on anybody else if possible. So we don't choose to work with any closed source software, for example. We either use open source software or we build it ourselves. The reason for that is that if things go wrong or we need to do an iteration, well, we then can either work with the community out there, or we can do it ourselves and put it back into the community. But we are in control. So if we are running into scalability issues, we can do that. And similar, we can do it with innovation. Because it's our own banking license, we can take decisions. It's our own acquiring license. We work directly with Visa, MasterCard. It's on us to decide where and what iteration or innovation we want to work on, and we don't have to then deal with all of these other partners to do so. And I agree with you. It's a difficult path, but I mean, it's always difficult. It's just a different path than many other companies are doing. And for us, that really works well, because we by now have to scale to drive some of these things forward.
And how do you avoid the dilemma of basically ending too much on the build side and sometimes also being on the buy side? Like, I mean, that is, I think, a dilemma in many tech companies, and I've seen it quite a lot, that you end up building something that turns out into not a competitive advantage, but something that rather slows you down yourself. Like, how do you avoid that?
By really working very, very closely with customers that really want a certain piece of functionality rather than coming up ourselves with it. I think a big risk there is that you don't validate your thoughts. And we've even turned it around and say we actually start with customers very often. By now, we are working with many of the biggest enterprises in the world in various different industries, on the digital side, on platform side, on more retail, omnichannel. The ones that are really leading the crowd. We are in that healthy situation by now that we have relatively good relationships with them. So we are actually hearing them out. What are the challenges that you have, either with us or in general in the payments world or financial technology world? What are the things that you would like to see? What are the things that are not working well for you? And out of this kind of vast or big, pile of feedback, we are trying to find out what are the patterns that we see, kind of what are the regions that people are interested in, what are the regions, they are not just interested, but there is no good solution, and we feel with our solution we could make a difference, or what is a product that is necessary. And over time, that has changed quite dramatically. When we started, it was all about, global expansion and stuff like that. Mostly on the e-com side. Over time, that has turned into, hey, we actually want to combine the very good service that we get on the e-com side also with stuff in person payments, so retail, brick and mortar. And it started with the real retailers, but what we've seen by now is that it has changed dramatically also into the worlds of platforms, people reselling ourselves. And if you look at it now, actually the focus of the industry has changed again much more towards, hey, how can we make it cheaper, more effective? It's too expensive. Everybody is in a mindset of creating more efficiencies. So how can you actually save costs? And that is, you would expect that this is typically that these focuses are not aligned between our customers, but what we actually see is that they are quite aligned. And we take our product decisions based out of this feedback. And then obviously we iterate quite a lot on them because we don't want to build something just specifically for one customer, but in general for everybody. So that's then the product work that we need to do.
Okay, but I mean, from a tech perspective, you can also look into, like, yes, you can look from the outside and talk to the customers, but what about the inside, right? Like, what about technologies that you maybe build which are not exposed to customers, which slow you down as a company? Like, how do you treat that when you realize, hey, we built this, I don't know, just simple example from the past, like we built this flat file database and now there's MySQL. Like, how do you avoid continuing to build this flat file database and jump on MySQL? Like, how do you avoid building too much?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a matter of focus on why you do it. So obviously, I mean, we needed to change our tech stack quite dramatically over the last 16 years. And we always do. We look at it a little bit as business as usual. But we do keep our tech stack very clean. So we don't really allow for people to use whatever tool they want. We only allow them to introduce new tools, for example, if it really solves a problem, well, first of all, that we have, and that we don't have another tool to fix it already. And if so, then there always is a decision to be made. Hey, what do we do with the old tool? Do we continue to maintain two, but then that's a cost that we need to take into consideration? Or is it actually kind of, are we replacing something else with it? Well, then we also need to think about the deprecation of it. So if you look at our tech stack, and it's actually a conversation that I need to have quite a lot with our engineering teams, and especially people that are starting at Adyen, that they come to me and say like, hey, why can I not use the tool that I know? You have this tool which is working fine, but I'm just better with the one that I've used in my old company. So why can I not use this one instead? And then we as an engineering leadership team always need to explain, well, there is a cost to maintain many of the tools that are doing exactly the same thing. So if there is no clear benefit to it, then we will not do it. And you have to change your approach towards changing our tech stack from, hey, I'm just better at it, or I want to work with it, or everybody in the industry is working with it, towards what is the real problem that you're trying to solve. That's the conversation that we are having quite consistently within the organization. Hey, there is a problem within our tech stack, how we scale, in our reliability approach or whatsoever. And then what are the tools that are actually solving for that? And then we can have a discussion around this one.
Yeah. So basically no permission if you just have a hammer and don't have a nail to just use the hammer, right? Basically.
And it's really kind of because there is companies that are different in that sense. They give kind of a lot of freedom for engineers to just choose whatever tool they wanna choose. We feel that this maybe on the short term gives you speed because people can use the tools that they're used to. However, we feel on the long term it slows you down because you have so many different systems to maintain, and you only have a handful of people that understand that specific system. That's the reason behind it, but it's not something for everybody. There is people that are unhappy with that.
Yeah. So, just out of curiosity, are you a PHP shop then as well, or because you have a PHP background, or Java? Okay, Java. Cool.
There is a little bit of PHP somewhere, but
okay. That's basically your code that is left somewhere.
No,
right?
that is tech debt that we are still working on getting out of the system.
Okay, so we all know Conway's law, and the fact that your IT infrastructure and general structure really follows your org structure. Like, how do you design your organization? Like, how do you design your tech teams? What structure have you built? What is the recipe for success at Adyen?
Yeah. I actually don't think that this is very special, to be honest. Kind of, it's mimics a little bit what I was saying beforehand, that we feel it's very important to work closely with our customers. So if you look at kind of the high end of our structure, kind of we have built organizations that are kind of focusing very much on the services that our customers are using. The biggest engineering team that we have is still focused on payments. So that's an organization that includes of many teams that are focused on everything that is dealing with payments. So you can think about all the, let's say, ways of sending us transactions. So either via APIs, SDKs, point of sale terminals, the software on point of sale terminals. Sometimes we even develop our own point of sale terminals, all the way to all the different integrations towards local payment methods, schemes, whatsoever, and all the reconciliation and everything. So that's that's probably the first part, and obviously an area that we are very much focused on, which is why there is the biggest group working on it. The second is platforms financial services. So that's kind of ultimately developing the systems that make use of our banking license, and making sure that, well, first of all, we use them for our own services. So we, for example, settle not via a third-party bank, but we settle directly, receiving the money from the central bank systems, and actually then putting them on a bank account of our customers. So we don't need to work with any third-party banks or many different ones in the areas where we have banking licenses. But we also use these services as white label services for our customers. So we allow our customers to onboard sub-merchants of different kinds, either for marketplaces or for software as a service companies or whatsoever, and offer them additional services like bank accounts or issuing cards or giving them loans or whatsoever. So that's kind of the second big area. And the third big area is data. Obviously, we do have a lot of data that we use mostly in order to create insights and hand these insights back to our customers, either through reporting or analysis or stuff like that. We use it a lot with machine learning and AI to optimize kind of payment flows, frauds, predictions, stuff like that. So that's the third part. And underlying of that is kind of a platform engineering organization that is kind of building the bridge between, hardware that we have put in data centers around the world, and offering services towards the other three groups so that they can continue to develop in their own speed and taking own responsibility about it, but still keeping it one system. I think that's the challenge also in terms of kind of being able to operate it, keeping it reliable, keeping it secure, these kind of things.
Security, I guess, is also like a very big thing. But first of all, like running an application, like do you follow basically you build it, you ship it, you run it, or is there some ops team involved that does it all, or how does it work at Adyen?
Right now we are a little bit in an in-between states. We are changing that. We used to come from a place where kind of the release itself was quite central. It's more historically built because we had most of our engineers in the past very close together in one office, in one floor even. So they actually have been able to kind of operate it by still putting everything together. We've outgrown that. So therefore we are currently in a process that we want to allow smaller teams to release themselves and also operate themselves. Right now we are kind of in between getting there. As a bank and as a financial services being high available and the need of being really reliable, we need to be quite careful with these fundamental changes. So we make it in very, very small steps, but we're moving forward in that matter.
Before we touch security, is there anything, like, if you could start from scratch now? I mean, you're there for ages, right? Like, if you could start from scratch and you would build a new payment system, what would you do differently if you could restart today?
Well, I mean, there is obviously kind of. We started in the same year that AWS was founded. So we started fully on-prem in a data center, and by now we have many data centers, and we are running things by now in a private cloud kind of setup, which serves us well now because we also have to scale. We have a very predictable business model, so we don't need a lot of elasticity that much. And we more or less process the same amount of transactions in the coming second that we have processed in the last one. However, if you would start now, you would probably not start like that, even though it by now brings us a lot of additional value. So I think that's an interesting interesting thought that I was also thinking, like, would we at some point make the step back to from one or multiple public cloud providers into a private cloud, because it becomes something that is maybe easier to scale and cheaper, and being able to take more control about it, or not. So that's an interesting challenge that, or maybe not challenge, but thought that I have in my mind that I would think about.
Okay, so like look at the cloud.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily saying that it's a good idea to fully jump on it, but I think naturally you would start there, and that would be a very different way to start.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like I would also start with public cloud as of today if I was building a small company, right? It really depends on the use case, right? For you, it might be way more efficient at the size you're at to not do that. I've read your let's say fundamental ideas of doing business, and there's one that says like don't hide behind email, which I really like. Like why is that? And is it really great? Like I think you recommend people to pick up the phone, right? And sometimes just use the phone and talk to each other. Like does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're referring to what we call the Adyen formula, and it actually describes the way of working with each other. The history of that is that it actually describes the way of working of the past. And at some point when the team was growing out of being in the same room, and people would just see how everybody else is acting and therefore would copy it, they had the feeling to write it down. And there are certain points in it, and I think indeed, don't hide behind emails. Pick up the phone is one that is often quoted. I think it works well, and the idea behind that is that we prefer direct communication over indirect one. And phone is one example. We also really love to be in an office together, and we encourage people to come to an office. We have very nice offices where it's fun to work. In order to allow for that, the idea is really that we believe if you can, turn around to your customer, to your colleague, and ask a question, you get to the point of the real problem much quicker than if you need to put it in an email and you send it over, and then it takes a few hours until somebody reads it, understands it wrongly, sends something back, and then very quickly you lose many hours, maybe even days, if you think about different time zones. So the idea is to encourage people for direct communication, and that, I think, works. It also puts you sometimes in a spot where you need to be a little bit more vulnerable, because you don't think that long about something, but that's intentional. We want people to share ideas very early in the process, because then you sharpen them very quickly, and you direct into the more relevant directions earlier, and that all speeds it up. So if people always feel like I need to come up with the perfect proposal before I write it down and then put it in an email, and then a lot of time has been put into it, maybe just for somebody to say, hey, we have that already, or we have discussed it a year ago when you were not here. Yeah, that's the reason why we don't do it. And then all of a sudden, all of that work was for nothing. So that's the idea behind it.
So I guess you never start working at Amazon then, right?
No,
after doing that,
so.
I mean,
no, I don't think so. No.
But
even though there, I think it is kind of, if you think about the Amazon idea of saying, well, we want to make sure that everybody has this common understanding of what we are talking about. I think that's a fair point. So if you bring people together, you want to make sure that there is a common knowledge ground, and therefore maybe write it down and share it. So it's not that at Adyen we don't send any emails, but we want to be able to come to conclusions quite quickly. And I think that's something that could work in Amazon as well, because if you write these 2-pagers, you also could sit next to somebody and make it better by just working on it together, rather than sending around versions and versions and versions and versions until you're there.
That also at least lets me think that you also encourage code reviews and like working together on a problem quite a lot. Is that true?
That is true. I think in general, if you look at, and I know you have been looking at the Adyen formula, if you think at all of the points that are there, you can actually always make a link towards speed. We want to be able to make fast decisions and move forward quickly, but in very small steps. That's kind of ultimately the idea, because we feel this actually leads to the best outcome. And that's then also true for how we take decisions on the engineering side, for example. There is some challenges around that. We have become a much more global organization by now, working in different time zones and many, I think 27 offices all around the world. So there is a need for documentation, also documentation of decisions, for example, because you just cannot expect that, you run into somebody that know about it. You need to make it better searchable and explorable by people and stuff like that. So we work on concepts around that one, but in general, the idea is still the same. Kind of, if you can speed up things by just picking up the phone or turning your head around to your colleague and spar an idea at a very early stage, or maybe also on an iteration after you've done it yesterday or so, that's definitely still the idea.
Interesting. That's I like the concept.
What is so special for you on it?
No. I just like I also like this aspect of like really talking to people and calling people every once in a while. I also use that in my day to day, and I think this overall improves the solution. Looking back at the Amazon comparison, I think you just end up with a better written documentation if you do it together. It's not so special, but I feel like that it confirms my approach, basically.
And actually, for myself, just one last thought for me. Actually, having it written down and all agree on it makes it easier to use, because I sometimes need to force myself to not hide behind email and just get it off my plate, off my inbox or to-do list by sending an email and put it on somebody else's plate. And then because of our agreement as a company and as people that work for Adyen to work like that, I then typically force myself to pick up the phone, even though it wouldn't be my natural first move. And it's typically also really, it leads to a better outcome, a faster outcome at least.
Yeah. See it the same. Touching security, like I'm really, really curious, as you're like a global company. I guess you also have, like, I don't know, freelancers working for you who might bring their own device. You have, I think, like a very complex or very heavily regulated area that you picked there. How do you ensure that security first really works, and like how do people accept it?
And that's obviously a very, very important topic for us. One very important part also there is we work for the long term. So we actually don't work with any freelancers. We don't work with anybody that is not an Adyen employee to touch our systems.
Okay.
And that gives us the chance to choose very specifically who is working for us, and we can check if they're willing to also take on some responsibility around security if they see it as their part. We actually do feel it is a chance to speed things up if you do it correctly. And the way how we want to do it correctly is that we don't really make it an afterthought, or we don't make it the responsibility of a relatively small team to keep our systems secure. But our idea is to make everybody aware of the necessity to build a secure company, Adyen, and also our systems. Give them the right trainings, tools, support, also by experts, but then also give them a lot of responsibility themselves to build it. So we have internal teams that help engineering teams to do threat analysis, for example, if they build a new product, to understand, hey, if we are building that, what are the things that are concerning? So they do that together with other people, but it's not like, hey, I want to do that, I send it over and I get a threats list back that I need to do. But there is then workshops where it goes through, hey, what do we want to achieve? Where are the touch points with customers or to the outer world, and by that, then they identify the threats, and they need to think about how to solve for it. We have internal tools that help them to test their stuff against each other. So if they, for example, release a new API, we do have internal and external pen testers that would check this. And again, it's not something that somebody else is doing, but it's the same teams that then say, hey, we are ready, we want to release it. That's maybe on an early stage, and get it tested. They get the responses back. They need to implement kind of the measures to make it better. So we really put it into the responsibility of the certain teams, and then you have to have the right people for that. So therefore, we really check beforehand if people are willing to work that way, or if they feel like, hey, I'm very good at something, but I really don't want to care about security. That should be the responsibility of the security team or whatsoever. Then it becomes difficult. So similar to some other examples that I was giving already beforehand, I think we want to be in our own control. So we want to have the right people. We want to have the knowledge in house. It's indeed our own licenses. Also, that makes it a little bit different because it's our own rules rather than, you rent the license from somebody else and then you get all of these, a list of requirements. If you want to do that, well, then you have to work with this company. You have to work with, I don't know, that system or whatsoever. It's on us now to decide that. And we have to obviously document it, build the right policies, procedures around it, and also go back to our regulators and have that checked. But in combination, that's how we handle it.
Okay. But does it mean that you also have like some, let's say, central tooling, some gravity that you try to introduce to all of your teams that kind of, I don't know, you run automatic checks for credentials in code. You basically check the software automatically and have reports that help the teams support the teams to let's say be secure by default, or is that like how do you treat that?
Absolutely, yeah. So there is multiple different tools that we run internally on different levels. So there is obviously kind of, let's say, vulnerability tracking tools or something like that, where we check intel out in the outside world and see if there is something that actually is relevant for our tech stack. And if that's the case, then it's put into somebody's responsibility. So there will be an owner for fixing the vulnerability, typically connected with a risk level, which will then define if we have to change our priorities and work on it immediately, or if we feel we don't have to. There is a lot of monitoring on our platform itself, seeing if it behaves the way that we expect it to behave, or if we all of a sudden see weird data streams going out, for example, or much more reads operations where we wouldn't expect them, different behavior, stuff like that. And that's true for the system, that's true for laptops, that's true for everything. But maybe there again, it's an example of, well, we can do that because we're in our own control. It's our systems, kind of, we own it end to end. We don't have to work with closed software where we maybe don't know what's going on internally. And then it's very difficult to see kind of the traffic going in and out. Is that still the right one or not? Also there, kind of running our own hardware allows us to really start on a very low network level and then have many additional levels on top where we kind of compare our insights with each other and see. So there's obviously a lot of controls in between, putting us in a position where we are, I think, able to really drive our own destiny when it comes to security. And maybe again, they're kind of not having closed software is just so powerful because we just know what's going on. We can look into the code ourselves rather than we need to ask somebody, hey, something's went wrong. There is an issue, or we see a vulnerability. Can you tell us if your software is actually kind of affected by that or not? we just can check it ourselves. And that leads to interesting effects, because for Log4j, the vulnerability, I think 2 years ago or so, we were able to fix that within 3 hours globally.
Wow, that's great.
And we fixed it for everything, because we didn't really have any dependencies on somebody else. When I woke up, somebody in Australia already has seen it, checked our code base, because it's an open code base for everybody. They were able to see where we have it. They already had a fix in place that was then tested and then rolled out gradually, which was crazy given also the time of the year and everything. But there you could really see the beauty of people that really feel ownership about it. They have the tools, they have the knowledge, and then these things come together.
Okay, now imagine you start your own, let's say, SaaS company, and you can start from scratch again. Like, how would you treat security from the start, and what would be your core, let's say, ideas of I mean, it obviously depends on the area, but now I've mentioned SaaS, so it can be less secure, let's say. What would you do from the start?
Well, I honestly believe that security is super important for all businesses. I think a proper security incident is a real business continuity risk for all companies. So therefore, I think it is something that you need to take very serious as a whole company. So if I would build it, I would not outsource it to somebody else, but I would make sure that everybody who is in the company understands the responsibility, and then dependent, obviously, on what's the business, what's the tech stack, get in the knowledge either by working with partners that help us to train the people, or getting people in, hiring the right folks, or maybe also using a system or another. But what I would really try to avoid is to make it kind of a hurdle somewhere, to say, like, one part of the organization don't care about it because there's that other part that will just, they will make sure it's happening, and you just send over whatever you want to release to them, and they will make sure it's secure, or otherwise they send it back. I think that's not gonna work.
So would the first thing, I think, be security, like entertaining security trainings then, or like if you could prioritize? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So I think if people don't understand the risk and the security concerns, it's very difficult for them to deal with it. I think, like, we spend a lot of time within the organization to make everybody aware of what our biggest risks are as a company, so that everybody can look at it. Because we have 4,500 people, and all of them, the one way or the other, dealing with either our customer data or with credit card details, or with operational tickets and financial information. So there's so many things that you need to explain people what the risks are and how to behave, and create a safe space as well, where they can make mistakes in a very controlled place, but they really understand that we cannot make mistakes in the production environment.
At least no big mistakes, right?
Yeah, very small controlled ones, I would say.
And after trainings, then, like, code scanners, or what would be your second priority?
Yeah, I think obviously, kind of these kind of things you need to put in place. I think also network monitoring, for example, needs to be there. I think a controlled engineering, or maybe in general environment for employees, is very important, where you understand what's going on. I think all of these pieces. But I mean, there is also very fundamental things that you want to put a proper identity management system in place, for example, to ensure that if people leave, their access is really revoked in all relevant systems. And I still see so many places where that's not the case, where I feel that's just very easy to solve for that. It's just not happening. Yeah. So I think that's a question of focus.
Like an IDP, that also comes with, like, most office solutions these days, right? Or most workspace solutions, right? You don't even have to buy it.
Exactly.
coming to the end rapidly, as we recorded for quite a long time already. I still have a little, let's say, surprise for you. Your your old Glossybox co-founder Charles actually gave me a secret Glossybox that was never shipped to anyone. It actually contains a secret device that he invented back then, a crazy Charles. It is something to help people to preserve beauty. It is a time machine. And imagine I now take this old time machine, which is the first release, like beta release, that you also worked on together. and we can use it now, and we travel back into the year 2001, which was the time when you worked as a PHP developer at your own company called Codas IT. Basically, I guess, I don't know, your own shop, or maybe you had a few employees as well. And you could now whisper something into young Alex's ears. What would you whisper to yourself?
I would probably. I think but I'm sometimes thinking about myself that I've not really spent enough time exploring the world in different cultures, business cultures as well. I got my first son in 2010, and only afterwards I was thinking how nice it would be to live abroad and work in the Silicon Valley for a while or stuff like that. And then obviously it became much more difficult. Like if I would be able to change that, I would probably do it much earlier in my career. Just work for half a year here, half a year there to explore different ways of working, different also tech stacks at a time when it's much easier in a personal life than it is now.
Yeah, I can imagine like this freedom is gone at a certain point, right? And you,
indeed,
like many people only realize it afterwards.
Yeah. And
I count myself in.
Yeah, for me, it was also not a big desire at the time. It was not that like I wanted to do it and I didn't do it. I was just really not thinking about it. But now I'm thinking I should have received that advice by somebody.
Yeah, I think you kind of get it if you first travel Asia or something, right? Like then it like automatically develops towards that. But if you start late with that,
and I mean, I traveled,
already have kids.
I traveled privately quite a lot, but I never really put it into a business context. And by now I see the value of people that have gone through it for a little bit, that have been able to make these experiences, and I would change it. Indeed.
Okay. Yeah. So, Alex, thanks a lot. Quite a good discussion. Really looking forward to the release and maybe to meet you at a certain point in Berlin or wherever you are.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot for the discussion, and I hope to see you soon.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Alphalist podcast. If you like this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. Alphalist is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to CTO@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on Alphalist, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.